The morning in the Dragon Empire started bright and calm. The golden towers of the royal school glowed under the twin suns. Children of noble dragon families played and studied there, guarded by soldiers and watched by teachers. No human was ever allowed near. The dragon saw humans as weak, slow, and unworthy to be near their royal blood. Ethan, a tired human janitor, walked past the gates every day on his way to clean the outer storage halls. He carried his little daughter, Lily, on his back, wrapped in a soft blanket. She was only 5 years old, sleepy and warm against his shoulder. He often whispered, "One day, sweetheart, maybe humans and dragons won't live so far apart." But he didn't really believe it. That day, something strange happened. A loud explosion shook the ground. The sky above the royal school turned black with smoke. Then came the screams, high, sharp, and full of fear. Ethan turned around and saw flames climbing the golden towers like angry snakes. The dragons in the courtyard shouted orders, their wings flapping in panic. One teacher cried, "The prince! The queen's son is still inside." Everyone froze. The fire had spread too fast. The air shimmered with heat. The roof of the tower began to collapse. The guards hesitated. None of them dared to enter. The queen's only son, young Prince Kael, was inside that burning tower, and the queen's wrath was feared by all. If anyone failed to save him, or worse, hurt him, their punishment would be worse than death. Ethan stood there, his heart pounding. He looked at the tower again. He could hear a faint cry, a child's voice calling for help. He looked down at Lily, who had woken up, her big brown eyes staring at the smoke. "Daddy," she whispered. "Someone's crying." The heat burned against Ethan's skin, but something inside him refused to walk away. "Stay here, Lily," he said, setting her down behind a stone pillar. She grabbed his sleeve, scared. "No, Daddy, don't go." He smiled softly. "I'll be right back, baby. I promise." Before anyone could stop him, the human janitor ran toward the burning building. A guard shouted, "Human! Stop!" But Ethan didn't listen. He covered his mouth with his arm and pushed through the thick smoke. The wooden doors were half melted, but he kicked them open. Inside, the air was filled with ash and the crackling sound of fire. The floor burned beneath his boots. The walls glowed red. He coughed hard, his eyes watering, but he could still hear that small voice, the prince, trapped and crying. "Hold on, kid." "I'm coming," Ethan shouted, running up the broken stairs. A piece of the ceiling fell, nearly crushing him, but he ducked just in time. His clothes caught sparks, but he beat them out with his hand. The second floor was already falling apart. Smoke was everywhere. Then, through the thick gray air, he saw a small dragon boy curled up under a broken table. His scales were glowing from heat, his wings trembling. Ethan ran to him, lifting the heavy beam that pinned his tail. The boy's golden eyes widened in shock. "You're human," he whispered weakly. "Yeah," Ethan coughed. "And you're in big trouble, kid. Come on." He took off his jacket and wrapped it around the boy's shoulders to protect him from the fire. The dragon child's claws clung to his arm. Ethan could feel the heat burning his back, but he didn't stop. Step by step, he carried the boy down the stairs as the roof cracked above them. Outside, the crowd gasped when they saw him. A human, covered in ash, carrying the royal prince out of the flames, something no one had ever imagined. Ethan stumbled through the doorway and fell to his knees, still holding the child close. The boy coughed, alive but shaking. For a long moment, everything was silent. Then the roar of wings thundered across the sky. The queen herself landed before the burning tower, her silver scales gleaming with fury. Her eyes blazed like fire as she saw her son in the arms of a human. Everyone around fell to their knees. The queen stepped forward slowly, her sharp gaze fixed on Ethan. He bowed his head, breathing hard, clutching his own daughter who had run to him crying. The queen's voice was cold and powerful. "Who gave you permission to touch my son?" Ethan looked up, his arms still around the boy and his daughter. His voice was hoarse but steady. "No one, Your Majesty," he said. "I didn't need permission to save a child." The queen's eyes narrowed, unreadable. Behind her, the fire finally began to die. The dragons around her waited for her to give the order, to punish him or thank him. No one knew what she would do. The young prince opened his eyes weakly, looked up at his mother and whispered, "He saved me." And in that moment, the entire Dragon Empire held its breath. The courtyard of the royal school was silent. Dragons stood frozen, their wings half open, their eyes wide. The air smelled of smoke and ash. In the middle of it all, Ethan knelt on the ground holding the trembling dragon boy close to his chest. His daughter Lily clung to his arm, coughing softly. Around them, the golden flames faded, leaving only black smoke curling into the sky. The guards didn't know what to do. No one had ever seen a human carry the Dragon Queen's son before. Some wanted to step forward and take the boy away, but they couldn't move. Fear chained their wings. The queen would be here any moment, and she would demand answers. The dragon child in Ethan's arms was weak, his small claws gripping Ethan's shirt. His eyes opened slightly, glowing like embers. "You saved me," he whispered. Ethan wiped soot from his forehead. "You're gonna be okay, kid. You're safe now." Before he could say more, a deep rumble shook the air. The wind exploded, dust swirling around them. The queen landed, her massive silver wings spreading wide, covering half the courtyard. Her scales shimmered with heat, and her eyes burned like blue fire. The soldiers dropped to their knees instantly. Ethan stood still. Lily hid behind him, gripping his shirt tightly. The queen's gaze locked on him, then on her son. Her voice rolled like thunder. "Who dared touch the royal blood?" Ethan swallowed, but didn't back down. He looked up at her towering figure. "Your son was trapped inside the fire," he said quietly. "I just did what anyone would do." The queen's tail lashed across the ground, making cracks in the stone. "You think a human knows what is right for a dragon royal?" Ethan's voice stayed calm. "I don't care what he is. He's a child, and he was crying for help." For a moment, the courtyard was so quiet that even the falling ashes could be heard. Then the young prince stirred again. He lifted his weak hand and pointed at Ethan. "Mother, he saved me." The queen's fierce eyes flickered, but she said nothing. Instead, she turned toward her son's wings. The silver edges were burned and cracked. Her anger turned into something deeper, fear. She slowly stepped closer, kneeling beside her son. "Kyle," she whispered, her voice shaking for the first time. The boy smiled faintly. "He carried me out, Mother." He didn't run away. Ethan gently placed the boy in her arms, stepping back. "He needs rest and water," he said. "The smoke. It's bad for his lungs." The queen stared at him as if trying to understand something she had never seen before. A human giving orders, and not out of arrogance, but out of care. Finally, she said, "Guards, take them all to the palace." The soldiers hesitated. "Your Majesty." "The human too?" Her eyes flashed. Did I stutter? The guards quickly bowed and obeyed. Ethan didn't fight it. He picked up Lily and followed them through the grand gates, passing walls covered with dragon symbols and golden flames. The city beyond watched in silence. A human walking behind the royal guards was something the people had never seen. By the time they reached the palace, the sun had begun to set. News of the rescue spread like wildfire through the empire. Whispers filled the markets and the taverns. A human saved the prince. Some said the queen would kill him for touching royal blood. Others said she might spare him for his bravery. No one knew the truth. Inside the palace, the queen stood beside her son's bed, her claws resting gently on his shoulder. She looked out the tall window where Ethan stood quietly with Lily. "You risked your life," she said slowly. "Do you know what that means in my world?" Ethan met her gaze. "Maybe it means nothing," he said, "but I couldn't just stand there." The queen studied him in silence. There was something in his voice, a simple honesty she wasn't used to hearing from anyone, not even her own kind. Finally, she said, "You will stay in this palace until I decide what to do with you." Ethan nodded. "Fine by me, Your Majesty. But my daughter stays with me." The queen blinked. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not even her generals. For a moment, her lips curved almost into a faint smile. As she turned to leave, she whispered something only her son could hear. Perhaps the stars sent him for a reason. Outside, the city lights began to glow, and across the galaxy, the story spread. The tale of a human father who ran into dragonfire to save a royal child. No one had ever dared such a thing before. And soon, the entire empire would feel the change his act had started. The royal palace of the Dragon Empire stood high above the clouds, shining with red and gold. Inside, guards marched through long halls carved from glowing crystal. The scent of smoke and silver filled the air. But behind all that beauty, tension was rising. A human had entered the palace, something that hadn't happened in 1,000 years. Ethan sat quietly in a small room made of smooth stone. His daughter Lily played on the floor with a small wooden toy humming softly. Two dragon guards watched them from the doorway, their eyes cold and unblinking. The silence was heavy. Ethan didn't know if he was a hero or a prisoner. He kept thinking about the queen, how her eyes looked like storm clouds hiding fire. He had faced danger before, but nothing like that gaze. Still, he couldn't regret what he had done. A child had been in danger and he had acted. That was all. Hours later, a sound echoed down the hall, sharp footsteps on the marble floor. The doors opened and the queen entered, her tall figure wrapped in a flowing silver robe. Her wings folded close behind her as she stared at him. Two royal counselors followed, both dragons with long horns and suspicious eyes. "Leave us," the queen ordered. The guards and counselors bowed and left the room. Only the human, his daughter, and the queen remained. Ethan stood up slowly, his hands open at his sides. "Your Majesty," he began, but she raised a clawed hand. "Silence," she said coldly. "I did not come for your excuses. I came for your truth." Her eyes glowed faintly blue like fire beneath ice. "Why did you risk your life for my son?" she asked. "You knew you could die. You knew no one would thank you. Yet you ran into fire." Ethan's voice was calm but soft, because he was a child crying for help. "I didn't see a prince. I saw someone who needed saving." The queen frowned. "Dragons don't do things for nothing. Humans don't either. So what is it you want, Gold? A place in my court?" Ethan shook his head. "I want nothing from you. I just want my daughter safe and to go home when this is over." That simple answer made her pause. She looked at Lily, who had crawled up beside her father. The little girl stared at the queen with innocent eyes and smiled. "You're very shiny," she said softly. For a moment, something flickered in the queen's eyes, surprise, maybe even warmth, but she hid it quickly. "Your kind is strange," she murmured. "You act with no fear, no reason. It's dangerous." Ethan gave a small smile. "Maybe. But sometimes fear keeps people from doing what's right." The queen turned away, looking out through the tall window at the burning sunset. "In my world, doing what's right can get you killed," she said quietly. She left without another word. The guards returned and led Ethan and Lily to a new room, larger, cleaner, almost like a guest chamber. But the door still locked from the outside. That night, as he laid Lily to sleep, Ethan heard whispers through the walls. Dragon servants spoke softly about him. Some called him brave. Others called him cursed. Far away in her royal chambers, the queen sat beside her son's bed. Prince Kale was awake now, his small wings wrapped in bandages. "Mother," he said weakly, "is he going to be punished?" The queen didn't answer. She brushed her claws gently through his silver hair. "He broke our law," she said slowly. "But he saved your life." Kale smiled faintly. "Then maybe our laws are wrong." The queen froze. No one had ever dared say such words to her. Yet from her own son it didn't sound like rebellion, it sounded like truth. Later she walked alone through the empty halls. Her reflection followed her across the polished floor, proud, perfect, and untouchable. But something deep inside her began to twist. The image of that human man carrying her son through fire would not leave her mind. "Why did you risk your life for one not your kind?" she whispered to herself. And for the first time in centuries, the Dragon Queen felt something she could not explain, curiosity mixed with doubt. The next morning she gave an order that shocked the court. "The human will not be executed," she said. "He will stay under my protection until I decide his fate." The nobles roared in protest. But the queen's word was law. From that moment, Ethan became the most watched human in the galaxy, protected by the queen, hated by her court, and trapped inside a palace full of secrets. He didn't know it yet, but his kindness had started something far bigger than a rescue. It had begun to shake the heart of an empire. Days passed inside the Dragon Queen's palace. The golden halls were filled with whispers. Everywhere Ethan went, dragon eyes followed him. Some were cold, others full of quiet curiosity. No human had ever lived under the queen's roof before. To many it was an insult. But to one young dragon prince it was the best thing that had ever happened. Prince Kale had healed enough to walk again. His scales still carried faint marks from the fire, but his spirit had returned. He often wandered the corridors, ignoring the strict guards who tried to keep him close. What he really wanted was to visit the strange human who had saved him. One morning, Cale appeared at Ethan's chamber door, holding something behind his back. The guards tried to stop him, but the prince lifted his chin proudly. "Move aside," he ordered.
"He is my guest." When the door opened, Ethan looked up from cleaning the small table.
Lily sat nearby, drawing on a piece of parchment with a dull blue crayon. She looked up, smiling brightly. "Hi, you're the dragon boy." Cale grinned, showing sharp little teeth. "And you're the human girl who's not afraid of dragons." He stepped inside and pulled out what he'd been hiding, a small crystal sphere that glowed softly in his hand. "For you," he said, giving it to Lily. "It shows the stars of my people." Lily gasped as the crystal lit up, painting tiny stars across the walls. She laughed and clapped her hands. "It's so pretty!" Ethan watched quietly, leaning against the wall. Something warm stirred inside him. For the first time since the fire, the palace didn't feel like a cage. The two children sat on the floor together. Lily showed Cale how to draw with crayons, and Cale showed her how to make little flames dance in the air without burning the paper. Their laughter echoed through the halls, soft and innocent. Servants passing by stopped to stare. They had never seen the royal prince smile like that. Some whispered that the human child had bewitched him. Others simply smiled and walked away, feeling a strange peace they couldn't explain. When word reached the queen, she came to see for herself. She stood at the doorway, hidden in shadow, watching. Her son was laughing, truly laughing, for the first time in years. He had grown cold and distant after his father's death, but now, with these humans, he looked alive again. Ethan noticed her reflection in the polished floor and turned slightly. He didn't speak, but nodded once, as if to say, "You see?" The queen said nothing. She simply watched as Lily handed Cale a drawing of all three of them, herself, Cale, and Ethan. At the bottom, Lily had written in shaky letters, "Family of fire and heart." Something in the queen's chest ached. She quickly turned away before anyone could see her face. That night, she stood on her balcony, the wind blowing through her silver hair. One of her advisors, Lord Dravos, stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty, the court grows uneasy. The human's presence offends the noble houses. They say your kindness makes you weak." The queen's eyes hardened. "Weak?" she said quietly. "Would they rather I punish the one who saved my son?" Dravos hesitated. "It is not mercy they fear, it is change." The queen looked down at the lights of the city below. "Change," she whispered. "Perhaps that is what this empire needs." Meanwhile, Ethan tucked Lily into bed. Cale had fallen asleep beside her, the glowing crystal between them. Ethan smiled at the sight. For the first time in many years, he felt something close to peace. He didn't know that beyond the walls. Not everyone shared that peace. In the dark corridors of the upper palace, a group of dragon nobles met in secret. "The queen loses her edge," one hissed. "Humans in the palace, it is an insult to our blood." Another slammed his clawed hand on the table. "If she will not fix her mistake, we will." Their eyes burned with hatred. They began to whisper plans, dark, careful plans, but down below, in the soft glow of the human's room, the sound of two children laughing still filled the air. Kyle and Lily were different in every way, one born of fire, one of flesh. Yet somehow, in their innocence, they built a bridge between two worlds that even empires could not destroy. And though the queen didn't yet realize it, that small bond between her son and a human girl would soon force her to make a choice, between her crown and her heart. The night was quiet inside the Dragon Queen's palace. The twin moons shone through the tall crystal windows, painting silver light on the marble floors. The guards outside stood in silence, their armor gleaming faintly. Everything seemed peaceful, almost too peaceful. Inside the guest chamber, Ethan slept lightly, one arm around Lily, the other resting near the edge of the bed. Across the room, Prince Cale was curled up on a soft cushion, the glowing star crystal flickering gently beside him. For the first time, the two children had fallen asleep smiling, their hands still close together. But in the darkness beyond the corridor, something moved. 6 dragon nobles cloaked in black scales crept through the shadows. Their leader, Lord Varnock, whispered, "The queen has gone mad with mercy. Her kindness will destroy our race. The human must die before sunrise." They moved silently, their claws wrapped to muffle sound. Each carried a weapon dipped in dark venom, poison made to kill without flame or noise. They reached the hallway outside Ethan's room, their glowing eyes full of hate. Inside, Ethan stirred. Years of hard life had made his senses sharp. He woke with a strange feeling. The air had changed. It was too still, too heavy. He heard the faintest scrape of a claw on stone. His heart began to pound. He whispered, "Lily, wake up, sweetheart." The little girl blinked sleepily. "Daddy?" "Quiet," he said softly, picking her up. He could smell smoke, not from fire, but from dragon breath. He turned toward the door and suddenly it burst open. The first attacker lunged. Ethan rolled to the side, grabbing a broken piece of furniture. He swung it hard, catching the dragon across the jaw. The creature roared, crashing into the table. "Get the girl!" One of them shouted. Cale woke instantly. His golden eyes flared. "No!" He screamed, fire bursting from his mouth. A bright flame shot across the room, forcing the attackers to jump back. Ethan grabbed a metal pole from the wall and swung again, striking another intruder in the leg. "Stay behind me," he shouted to the children. Lily clung to Cale, trembling but brave. "Daddy, there's more." 3 more dragons pushed through the smoke. One raised his blade, but Cale spread his small wings wide and let out a powerful roar, a sound that shook the windows. It wasn't loud enough to summon guards, but it was enough to make the invaders hesitate. Then from far down the hall, another roar answered, louder, fiercer. The sound made the very walls shake. It was the Queen. The door exploded open, and she entered like a storm of silver fire. Her wings filled the entire doorway, her eyes blazing blue. With one furious sweep, she burned the first attacker into ash. The others froze in terror, their blades falling to the floor. "Traitors!" her voice thundered, echoing through the palace. "You dare raise a claw under my roof?" One tried to speak. "Your Majesty, we only sought to protect—" Her tail lashed like lightning, striking him across the chest and sending him crashing into the wall. Flames rose behind her as she moved forward, her power unstoppable. Ethan shielded the children from the heat. When the last of the nobles fell, burned and broken, the Queen stood still among the ashes, breathing hard. The room was quiet again, except for the soft sob of Lily. The Queen turned, her eyes softer now. She looked at Ethan, at the man who had fought with nothing but courage and a broken pole. "You fought to protect my son again," she said quietly. Ethan nodded slowly. "I just did what I had to." The Queen looked at Lily, trembling in his arms. "And your child?" "She stayed to protect my heir." Cale ran to his mother, hugging her tightly. "They're my friends, Mother. They didn't hurt anyone. They saved me again." For a long moment, the Queen didn't speak. She looked at the destroyed room, the fallen nobles, the trembling human. Then softly she said, "Maybe the fire that burns in humans is not so different from ours." She knelt before Ethan and Lily. "You have my protection now, not as prisoners but as honored guests." The guards rushed in, bowing in shock. The Queen turned to them and spoke coldly. "Take the traitors' ashes to the council. Let them see what happens when loyalty burns away." As dawn touched the palace towers, the Queen stood at the window, watching the first light spread across the horizon. Her empire had been wounded that night, not by enemies, but by fear. And as she looked at the human father holding his sleeping daughter, she made a silent vow. She would not let fear rule her people anymore. The night had begun with hate, but it ended with something far stronger: trust. Morning light spilled into the grand halls of the Dragon Queen's palace. The air was quiet but heavy, the kind of silence that follows after something powerful and frightening. The smell of burned stone still lingered from the night before. Guards whispered about the Queen's fury, about how she turned her fire on her own nobles. In the center of it all, Ethan sat beside a wide window with Lily sleeping in his lap. He hadn't rested all night. His clothes were torn, his face smudged with soot, but his eyes stayed alert. Across the room, Prince Cale slept soundly, finally safe. When the door opened, Ethan tensed, but it was the Queen. She wore no crown this time, no armor, only a simple robe of silver silk. Her wings were folded tightly behind her, and her expression was calm but tired. "Leave us," she said softly to the guards. They obeyed instantly, leaving the chamber silent. Ethan stood, still holding Lily carefully. "Your Majesty." The Queen looked at him for a long moment. "You could have fled last night," she said quietly. "You could have run when they came for you." "Why didn't you?" Ethan shrugged lightly. "Running never fixes anything. I've spent my life running from things I couldn't fight. I didn't want to run from this. The queen stared at him, not with anger now, but with something like wonder. Then she moved closer, her sharp, regal voice softening. Do you know why I feared humans? Ethan shook his head. Because of what we did in the past? Her eyes lowered. No, because of what I did. She turned away, her long tail brushing the floor. Many years ago, before Kale was born, there was a war between dragons and humans. I was not yet queen then, only a commander. I led armies that burned human cities. I thought I understood them. Weak, foolish creatures who hid behind machines, she paused. But one night, a human soldier saved my life. Ethan frowned. Saved you? Yes, she said, her voice trembling slightly. My ship had crashed on a frozen planet. My own soldiers abandoned me thinking I was dead. A human found me there, a mechanic from the enemy side. He carried me from the wreckage, fed me, kept me alive for weeks. I hated him for his kindness, because it made me question everything I'd believed. Ethan listened silently. The queen's eyes glowed softly, not with fire this time, but with pain. When the war ended, he refused to leave. He said he loved me, and for a short time, I let myself love him too. But our world didn't accept it. The council called him a curse. They came for him one night, and I was too afraid to stop them. Her voice broke. He died because I stayed silent. The chamber felt cold. The mighty dragon queen who ruled entire worlds stood trembling as if that one memory still burned her from the inside. Ethan spoke softly. You never forgot him. No, she whispered. Kyle was born months later. I told everyone his father was a noble dragon killed in battle. But the truth is, my son is half human. Ethan's eyes widened. Half human? She nodded slowly. That's why I feared you when you touched him. I thought your kind would bring ruin again. But when I saw you run into fire with a child in your arms, I saw him in you, the man I once loved. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sunlight glowed golden through the window, falling across their faces. Lily stirred awake, blinking sleepily. When she saw the queen, she smiled and reached out her small hand. Don't be sad, pretty dragon lady. The queen knelt down, her silver robe pooling around her. She gently took Lily's hand, her voice trembling. Your father is a brave man, the kind I thought no longer existed. Ethan lowered his eyes, his voice quiet. Sometimes bravery isn't about fighting. Sometimes it's about not giving up on people. The queen smiled faintly. You sound like him. Then, as if a decision had formed in her heart, she stood tall. I will tell the truth, she said firmly. To the court. To the galaxy. My son will not grow up in lies. If they wish to call him impure, they can call me that too. Ethan blinked in surprise. You'll risk everything? I already lost everything once, she said softly. This time I won't run from it. At that moment, a ray of light cut through the window and fell upon her. The once feared queen, standing proud again, but with new strength born from truth. As she walked toward the door, she looked back at Ethan one last time. When I see you, human, I remember that courage and kindness can change empires. And for the first time, the Dragon Queen smiled, not as a ruler, but as someone who had finally found peace with her past. The great hall of the Dragon Empire had never been this full. Thousands of dragons gathered beneath the shining crystal ceiling, their scales reflecting every color of fire. Banners of gold and red hung from the walls. The sound of wings, whispers, and disbelief filled the air. Today was not a normal day. Today the queen had summoned the entire court for an announcement that could shake the galaxy itself. Ethan stood quietly near the back of the hall, holding Lily's small hand. Beside them stood Prince Kale, dressed in silver armor trimmed with blue, not the armor of war but of peace. The little prince looked nervous, his wings twitching slightly. Do you think they'll hate me? He whispered. Ethan bent down to his level. Some will, he said gently. But that doesn't matter. The truth never needs everyone to love it, just someone to stand for it. Kale nodded, gripping Ethan's hand tightly. Then the horn sounded, deep, thunderous, ancient. The queen entered. She wore her crown but not her armor. Her silver robe flowed behind her like light itself. When she stepped onto the platform, silence fell over the hall. Citizens of the Dragon Empire, she began, her voice echoing through every corridor. You have all gathered to witness truth. Not rumor. Not fear, truth. Her gaze swept across the crowd. You have heard that a human saved my son from fire. You have heard that I allowed him into my palace. You have heard that I protected him when others wanted him dead. All of this is true. A murmur rose from the crowd, shock, anger, confusion. But the queen lifted her claw and silence returned. What you do not know, she said, is why I did it. For years I have hidden a truth from you all. The prince you see before you is half human. The hall exploded with noise. Dragons shouted, some in disbelief, some in rage. Blasphemy! One cried. Lies! Shouted another. The queen dishonors the throne. But the queen didn't flinch. Her voice grew stronger. Yes, half human. Born of a love I was once too weak to protect. The man I loved was a human. He saved me when I would have let him die. And because I feared your judgment, I allowed his death to be covered in silence. She looked down for a moment, then raised her head proudly. But I will hide no longer. That same courage that once saved my life has returned, in another human, who saved our son without fear. All eyes turned toward Ethan. He stood frozen, uncomfortable with the attention, but the queen beckoned him forward. Ethan of Earth, she said, her voice ringing clear. You ran into fire to save my heir. You fought against your own weakness to protect a child not your own. For that I name you protector of the young, guardian of peace between our races. The hall went silent again. Then slowly Cale stepped forward, taking Ethan's hand and lifting it high. He's not just a protector, the boy said, his voice small but brave. He's my family. Gasps filled the air. A prince calling a human his family. Lily, standing beside them, tugged on the queen's robe and whispered, Does that mean we're all family now? The queen knelt, her eyes softening. Yes, little one, she said gently. That is what it means. Outside the palace, the announcement spread across the empire like a shockwave. Some raged, others wept, and many simply listened. But among the younger dragons and those who had grown tired of old wars and ancient hate, something began to change. Days later, a grand ceremony was held. Dragons and humans stood together for the first time in history. No weapons, no chains, but only open hands and cautious hope. The queen signed a new decree, opening peace talks with the human colonies. As the crowd cheered, Ethan looked at the queen standing beside him. You've started something no one can undo, he said. She smiled faintly. Good, the galaxy has burned for too long. Let it finally breathe. Cale turned to Lily, holding her small hand. Someday, he said shyly, I'll visit your world. And I'll bring cookies, Lily said proudly. Everyone nearby laughed softly, even the queen. For the first time in centuries, the mighty throne room of dragons echoed not with roars, but with laughter. When the ceremony ended, Ethan lifted Lily in his arms, looking up at the stars beyond the palace windows. We came here with nothing, he whispered. And somehow we changed everything. The queen joined him, her eyes following his gaze. No one dared rescue my son, she said softly. Until a human holding his own child stepped forward. Ethan smiled. Maybe sometimes the smallest steps light the biggest fires. As the stars glimmered above, the old walls of hate began to crumble. And in their place, a new story was written. Not of dragons or humans, but of hearts brave enough to cross the fire together. The end.